She said my name like it was a correction. Not loud, not sharp, just enough that the other guy looked up from his phone and smiled like he'd been waiting for it. We were standing outside the lift, glass walls, late evening, the kind of hour where offices pretend to be empty but never are. She stood between us, not physically, not yet, but in the way attention arranges itself. She rested her badge against her hip and asked, "Did either of you send the deck?" Either. Of. You. I hadn't known there was an either. She'd forwarded my draft earlier with a single line. This is promising. No emoji, no CC, just enough warmth to feel selected. He said he'd sent his version an hour ago, casual, confident, like this wasn't news. She nodded once. Then she smiled at me, softer this time. Yours had better framing, she said. His numbers are stronger. The lift chimed. Doors opened. She stepped in first. I followed without thinking. He did too. Inside the mirrored box, I caught my own reflection adjusting posture, voice already rehearsing an improvement I hadn't been asked for. She didn't look at each of us again. She stared at the floor indicator like the outcome was already decided. That's when I understood. I wasn't chosen. I was entered. It didn't start as competition. It never does. It started as proximity with advantages. She'd ask me things she didn't need to ask, opinions framed like trust. She'd forward emails with comments that sounded private but weren't marked as such. Thought you'd appreciate this angle. Curious what you'd do differently. Always you, never we. I mistook access for intimacy. That was my first error. The second was noticing him only after she made sure I did. She never introduced us properly. She'd mention him the way people mention weather, unavoidable, not personal. He's quick, he's ambitious. Then, later, to him, I'd hear my own name reflected back with altered adjectives. You're thorough. You're thoughtful. Compliments sorted like tools. We began orbiting the same problems without acknowledging each other. Parallel drafts, overlapping calendars, separate feedback loops. I felt elevated, quietly special, because she kept coming back to me with refinements, never with conclusions. I worked harder, earlier mornings, later nights. I wanted my output to deserve the tone she used with me. Then she started copying us both. Not fully, just enough. I told myself it was transparency. That's what grown environments do. But the phrasing shifted. Her notes became comparative without naming it. This is cleaner, this is bolder. No subject, no owner. When I asked her once, carefully, whether we were duplicating effort, she tilted her head like the question itself was revealing something about me. I like seeing how people respond to pressure, she said. It tells me who they are. People. Ploy. I laughed, because that's what keeps you in good standing. But something tightened, not jealousy. Hunger. The need to outperform without being seen as trying. That's when I started monitoring his work. Not officially, just enough to anticipate, just enough to stay ahead. She didn't have to say anything. She watched it happen, adjusted timelines, shifted praise, let silence do the sorting. And I kept telling myself this was opportunity, that the feeling in my chest was excitement, not erosion. The first time we spoke directly, it felt like breaking a rule that hadn't been written down. We met by the printer, neutral ground. He smiled easily, like this was overdue. Did she tell you we're both up for it? He asked. Up for it. The phrasing landed before the meaning. For what? I said. You looked genuinely surprised, not smug, worse, confident. Lead on the expansion review. She said it's between us. Trial run. Trial. I felt heat rise, not anger. Not yet. But embarrassment for how long I'd been performing without an audience. All those late nights framed as private momentum. All that effort calibrated against a ghost. She said she liked my framing, I offered, immediately regretting it. He nodded. Yeah, she said your structure's solid, that I'm more aggressive. Aggressive. That explained the tone of his drafts. The numbers pushed just past safe. The risks floated with approval. I went back to my desk and rewrote everything. Leaner, sharper, less me. She didn't respond. Not that night. Not the next morning. Then, just before the meeting, She sent a message to both of us. Same words, same punctuation. Bring what you think wins. Inside the room, she let us present back to back. No commentary, no interruption. She watched the way people watch games they didn't bet on. When it was over, she thanked us both. Equal tone, equal smile. Later, hours later, she stopped by my desk. Alone. You handled that well, she said. Not everyone does. Does what? I asked. She paused, like she was deciding whether honesty was useful. Competes without becoming unpleasant. There it was, the reward. Not the role, the recognition for surviving the setup. I realized then that winning wasn't the point. Being willing to play was. And I hated myself a little for how relieved I felt when she walked away. The humiliation wasn't public. That's what made it efficient. She stopped coming by my desk. No more calibrated warmth. No more selective questions. When she needed something, it came through the system, neutral, time-stamped, indistinguishable from anyone else's request. I told myself it was professionalism, that the trial was over and this was the outcome. I waited for disappointment to arrive and declare itself. Instead, she invited me to coffee. Not a meeting, not a check-in. Coffee. Late afternoon, outside the building. The kind of invitation that feels like restoration. She asked how I was holding up. I answered honestly. That was another error. She listened without interrupting, eyes steady, posture open. When I finished, she nodded slowly, like she was filing something away. You took it personally, she said, not unkindly. I laughed again. Reflex, isn't that normal? She smiled, just a little. Some people turn comparison into fuel, others turn it into identity. I didn't like the category she was placing me in, but I wanted out of it more than I wanted to challenge her. He thrives on friction, she continued, stirring her cup though it didn't need it. You thrive on being seen as chosen. Chosen. Past tense. I thought. I started, then stopped. There was no sentence that didn't sound like a confession. She leaned back. I never promised you anything. She was right. That was the cleanest part. No claim I could dispute, no line I could quote. But I did give you visibility, she added, and you used it well, until you started watching him instead of yourself. That's when it landed. Not as rejection, but as assessment. She wasn't apologizing. She was explaining why I didn't qualify anymore. Across the table, her phone lit up. A message preview. His name. She didn't hide it. She didn't rush. She glanced, smiled, and locked the screen face down. He's comfortable being measured, she said. That matters. And the coffee went cold between us. I realized then that the competition hadn't ended. It had simply moved somewhere I wasn't invited to follow. My value had been extracted, my reactions observed, my limits mapped. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm. Brief, professional, unnecessary. You did well, she said, just not in the way you thought. I walked back inside alone, replaying every moment where I had mistaken attention for alignment. She hadn't let me feel chosen to lift me. She'd done it to see how far I'd bend once I wasn't,